Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for some more Watercolour Wednesday. I'm continuing to explore with these Gansai Tambi Art Nouveau paints, so particularly their Art Nouveau set. We did some basic leaf mixing to get used to them in the quartets as they lay them out in the palette to start with. So in the fours across as they create the palette that you receive. For this colour mixing grid, I've laid them out in a slightly different order, just so that I can get more of a consistent rainbow going through. That's for my sort of colour brain. That's how it likes to operate. I could obviously have started this anywhere. I didn't need to start with the mauves. I could have started this with the blues, the greens, the yellows, the browns, the pinks, and then the purples would have gone here. Or I could have started with the yellows, and then it would have gone yellows, browns, pinks, purples, blues, greens. So you can start that grid any way you like. And along the top and down the side, it's just a soft wash of each colour. And then where the colour meets itself, I've gone for a thicker or more pigmented version. So the same as doing a double glaze of it. But actually all I did was do a slightly drier mix so that you get more pigment. If I was doing this over again, there are a couple of colours that I might swap round. Obviously, when you're looking at the colour in the pan, it doesn't necessarily fully reflect what turns up on the page. So, yeah, a couple of those I might do the other way around. Interestingly, it seems to work better in the darks than in the pales. In any case, when you're doing a mixing grid like this, 24 by 24, yeah, you need 24 across the top, 24 down the side. This is my basic Clairefontaine sort of mid-range watercolor paper pad. And yeah, I'm going to start going in order not to have, because obviously the colors meet twice. So this green is going to meet this blue here, and it's also going to meet this green and this blue here. So what I tend to try to do is keep the vertical color as the dominant one. So when this green meets this blue here, the green will be the main part of the mix. So rather than a 50-50, I'm going to try to do a bit more green than blue. But where this blue and this green meet here, I'll try to keep the blue as the slightly more dominant colour, which means that those two squares, even though it's the green and the blue and the green and the blue, hopefully won't end up being exactly the same colour. We'll see how we go. But I thought I wouldn't film the entire process because that seemed to me somewhat tedious for you all. But yeah, so here's the basics. So I'm taking my first pink and my second pink, and I want a little bit of this one, and I want, as I said, slightly more of this one to mix this up. I'm thinking these pinks are going to be all much of a muchness because they're very similar colours to each other in any case. So that's not necessarily going to get me anything mind-blowing. So now let's take, also obviously how wet you are in your mixing is going to impact the colour pigment you get. I'm gonna go again with a slightly drier mix because that was quite watery. So I'm putting in another layer, and yes, as I thought, that's a fairly similar colour. And then what I'm going to try to do so as to keep these squares separate from one another is I'm gonna hop to number 4. So first pink, and then the blue grey. And as I said, I'm going to try and keep the top colour as the primary. So I'm taking a bit more of that blue, the blue grey, and that goes in there. Interestingly, that's made it more grey. Pretty. Okay. And you kind of need to keep your wits about you a little bit with this, particularly if you're going to jump as I'm jumping. So pink number 1. So we're sticking with this. Blue grey. Don't want to go to this one. I want to jump to this one. So there's a chance for things to dry in between. I do need to clean the brush in between that because I don't want to put lots of pink down in here. But I'm going to try and keep this as the dominant colour of the two. And I think that might need a bit more. I think this is going to give us a sort of off purple. Let's have a look at that. Interesting. Again, it's darkening the tone, so there are clearly some dark pigments in that pink. Grand. So just to show you what I mean, I might as well keep that mix on the mat, but now add a bit more of the pink, and then I can go straight in. In fact, that's quite an efficient way of doing it. I think I have done that in the past. So that's blue-grey with the pink. In fact, that's way, it's gone way the other way. Let's put a bit more blue back into it. There we go. That's more what I'm after, is sort of more of a greyish pink. That's nice. I might give it another little bit of blue. This is not a precise art. I'm not doing 60-40 and 70-30, and I'm just going until I've got something that feels to me like a mix that contrasts with the one above. Yeah, that's nice. That's a sort of pinky silvery grey as opposed to a mauvey grey where they met up here. Let's do, since we're doing this, let's be efficient about this. So pink number 1 and pink number 2, but this time keeping pink number 1 as the dominant. So just a little touch of number 2. And as I say, this is going to be really similar. But just a little bit brighter than the one next door. So those are the two colour mixes in those two squares. Great. So we've also done this blue with the pink. So let's do a double of that. And this time having the pink as the more dominant colour. It's coming down here. A little touch of this blue. See what we get. A bit more than that. But the joy of this is playing, is being able to just look at colours, see how they shift and change. And that's perceptibly different from the one up above, which I love. So I'm just getting a full range of colours out of these paints. So that is the blue and pink, if you like. And this is the pink and blue. So those two, and again, you can kind of do it mathematically on the grid. They're the squares that are opposite each other positionally. Grand. Let's move on. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Paint number 8 over here in the 8th position on the grid. So we'll go with a bit of the pink. And then plenty of number 8. See what that gets us. Are we sure this is right? It's a right old game. When you've got this many paints, if you've not done a colour grid before, I recommend starting with 3 or 4 paints. Just do a colour grid that is 3 or 4, rather than diving straight in with this headache. Now I'm going to put a bit more pink in the mix. In fact, that's a lot of pink in the mix. Let's pick up a bit more green. You saw I put that stripe of pink, but I can now pick it up again as I put that green back in. And we go pink. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It would help maybe if I put the names into here. Yeah, and that's a pinker version of that colour. So those two squares, this one here, this one here. Nice. So pink and number 10. You can see my mat is starting to become rather pink here. Let's get you. It's you we want quite a lot of to start with. Ooh, I'm enjoying that. That's giving me a sort of brownish hint of autumnal brown coming into there. Bit more pink, just so we get a significant difference from the green colour. And then definitely a bit more pink to take it down here. And you can see if you allow yourself to get into the rhythm of it, and that's a lot easier if you're not talking while you're doing it, just saying, you'll find yourself building a pattern in how you mix up these grids. And as you build that pattern of paint forming, this process will start to go more quickly. So I'm now on here, pink, and number 12. Want a bit more of that green. There it is. Ooh, that's lush. That's one of those sort of rose foliage when it's going over kind of colours. And I'm going to enjoy this one as well. So the purpose of alternating is so that these squares have time to dry, rather than putting wet paint next to wet paint, which is going to run into itself. Grand. Let's do one more, and then I'll probably do some more without you and come back when we're a bit further down the grid. We're now on this glorious yellow. Wow, that's zingy. So of course, pre-mixed colours are fun to play with, but there is something about mixing up your own colours that can give you an extra zing. It can somehow set light to a colour in the way that a single pigment doesn't necessarily catch fire. I'm enjoying both of those. See, again, it's because it's autumn, it's these autumnal golds and oranges and browns and pinks that are really firing my creative excitement at the moment. Let's go for one beige so that you see one of those in action. That's going to need a bit more of that because I've got quite a lot of pink on the mat. There we go. That's only very subtly different from the one above, but in quite a nice way. I could go in with a glaze of the pink, or actually there's a bit more pink on the mat right here. So I can do that again if I want a bit more of a fundamental difference. And then back in with a bit more pink to give ourselves the one down here. Just want to try and pick that up. I don't want that in that square. But this is what I mean. This will now also have a chance to dry. So lifting the colour up and then just drying that so it doesn't continue to leak into it. Is it fair to go all the way to the end of the row? No, look, I'm going to do some more off camera. Otherwise we're going to end up with another hour-long video like we had on Saturday. And I'll come back when we've done some of that, and maybe we'll get to some doodling or mixing up some leaves in colours that are gonna feel a bit more me than these quartets. Back shortly. Just a couple of quick observations before I rinse my water out to start again. So what you get if you follow through this mixing pattern is across the top for this pink, you get slightly modulated versions of each of the original colours. And down the side, you get the variation on the pink colour. So very much pinker, because this has been the dominant colour in each of these mixes, whereas this has been the dominant colour in each of these mixes. I see that I've got some paint on my finger and I've just smeared it across all of these. That's a little frustrating, but I'll live. But yeah, so that was just to let you see, even though each of those mixes is the same thing, what you get along there is very different from what you get along there. Also, bear in mind that the first run you do is the longest, because from here on in, this is going to be one colour fewer that I have to mix. This is 2 colours fewer, 3 colours fewer. By the time I get to here, I only have to do 3 mixes in each line, and I'm done. So yes, the process sort of speeds up as you go automatically. So time to empty the water. I'm going to do some more mixing, and I'll come back when there's maybe just a little bit left to do. I'm welcoming you back as we arrive at the greens, which, as you can see, are halfway down the pack. In fact, not even quite halfway down. It's these two, so number 11 and 12, when we've got to do 24. But as you can see, we're 3/4 of the way through the grid. And this is what I mean about the process gets shorter, because we've actually already mixed these greens with half the colours. So we've just got to do the remainder in it, and it'll get quicker and quicker from here on in. But I had said in the previous episode that I wasn't wild about the greens as individual colours by themselves, but that I thought they would start to come alive when we were mixing. So I thought I'd invite you back in as we were about to hit some greens and some yellows meeting each other. But you can also see that there are some magnificent greens being mixed up via the other colours. Of course, as soon as you get your blues and your yellows together, then you're going to get delicious things going on. It will be no surprise to anybody that I love the colours being mixed up with that blue-grey. Just run your eye down that column with those glorious blue-grey tones coming in. I also really enjoyed this pale blue and what that mixed up. There are colours sort of in here that are reminiscent of those beachy colours we did some watercolour stenciling with. And it's also no surprise that the palest of pale pinks is giving us almost a pastel version or a pale version of the original colours, because that palest of pale pinks is almost all white pigment. So it's almost in effect like mixing the paints with white. In any case, I'm now on the process of mixing up this middle green, 301. What did that call itself? Pea green, was it? I forget now. I've moved them all around, so I can't. Ivy green. They thought this was ivy green, so I'm in the process of mixing up ivy green. I've already done it with the one next to it, so we're now heading off down the palette. And as I've been going, I've also remembered some of the shortcuts. Well, not shortcuts, but sort of ways to make this process flow as much as possible to keep things easy. And of course, it is to take your primary colour, put a patch of that on the mat, and then to bring your secondary colour in just from one side, and then that's mixing up your version that is majority secondary colour, like so. And then you can just go straight back into the other side, bring some of that in, and that gives you your majority primary colour. Maybe I should call them A and B, because primary and secondary mean something completely else. Mean something else completely when we come to colour theory. So there's my primary colour, puddle of that. I'm now moving on to my next mix, which is the yellow. That's what we're up to next. And so I come in just from one side with that, and that enables me to pick how much of that green I want to bring in, and I can put that into that square. And then the paint is already ready on the mat for me to draw some of it back over. And again, I can decide how much of that I want to add in. But the zinginess of that green mixed with the yellow is already making me a lot happier than that green by itself. So puddle of the green. And we're now moving on to this. This as a mixing colour is also making me really happy. Again, no surprises. It's a kind of beige grey, and so it's creating mixes that, yeah, my brain is really rather happy to play with. And yes, this is time consuming if you're doing it with 24 colours. I mean, if you're doing 3 or 4, you can be done very quickly. Mixing up 24 colours each with each other is going to take time, but don't think of it as a task. Think of it as a joy. I've had some lovely music on. I've been listening to favourite music, and for me there's a real delight in just seeing these colours that emerge in front of you. Just finding out. It's also a really, really good exercise because you're doing it over and over and over again, with varying amounts of pigment and varying amounts of water. It's also a really good exercise in just seeing that addition of water. How much easier does that make it to spread the paint on the page? When I've got the pigment quite dry, yes, of course, what I get is a lot of texture coming in from underneath, but how much better to, if you want flow, to just add that little bit of water, and that makes a massive difference. I'm now finding, because I'm chatting, already it's going more slowly, because I'm, instead of just being in the moment and noticing which paint I'm mixing and knowing immediately therefore which one I'm going to next, I've distracted myself with thoughts that I'm sharing with you, and I'm having to just be careful to make sure I go back in and mix up the right paint. So you can see I'm holding a piece of kitchen roll in my other hand, completely ready to just go. There's my puddle of ivy green, and we're now on to paint down here. So again, I'll come in from that edge, and that gives me my majority that, but it's, see, oh la la, second one of those, yeah, yes, that was not quite enough pigment. It wasn't going to give me a fair mix. So putting that down, and these gradations are extremely subtle, but to me there's a real joy in that. Again, you'll notice the versions going across are adjusted versions of these, if you like. The version as I come down is really giving me variations of that green. So as opposed to variations of the colours along the top, it's variations of the green as I come down here. And that's because in this secondary mix, in mix B, they are primarily the vertical colour. So here comes in this extraordinary sort of rusty red colour, and that's giving me some really interesting mixes here. You can see there are going to be incredible autumnal tones available. That's a bit grayer, partly because that's a red and a green, essentially a red and a green, and because you're mixing to opposite sides of the colour circle, you're always going to end up going towards neutrals. So if you mix blue and orange, you'll end up going towards a neutral because they sit directly opposite each other on the colour wheel, and that's always going to get you towards greys and browns, those neutrals. And we're now at our lovely, I think it was Mars yellow, was it? So again, I'm going to come in, oh, I see that bit's off, apologies. So this has given some really fabulously autumnal mixes, and if you just look down that Mars yellow line that my finger is tracing, again, really subtle shifts and changes, but beautiful ones for leaf painting. And then I might clean that off a bit because it's quite red, bringing in the rest of the puddle in order to paint this square here, and that's giving me that version of green. So I've been working with fairly dry mixes because I want to, both because I want to get the strength of the pigment, but also because I'm working with very little squares. So if you work with a really watery mix, it's much harder to control in this tiny square where it's headed to. The danger is it'll end up mixing with something you don't want it to mix with. But there have been times when, as I have now, I've got a bit more water on the mat, and that causes a really different sort of reaction within the paints, within the pigments. Again, these two colours side by side, from a distance you think, oh, there's no difference between them, but as soon as you get close to them in a decent light, that's the other challenge today, and as we head into winter, I'm reasonably happy with my lighting setup here, but I might look into some more bulbs. I've been searching out as close to daylight bulbs as I can, but the good old-fashioned daylight bulb mostly doesn't exist now because, of course, it was not an energy-saving bulb. Where have we got to? We've done the bright pink. This pot, I think this was the Potter's Pink, has also done some really interesting things, partly because it's got that heavy clay sort of feel to it. It's been doing some interesting things, and just a touch of it, so where I've got mostly green, is getting me again really nice. That is very similar to, for instance, something like the chromium oxide green in the Daniel Smiths. But this is, I mean, this is hard to be fully accurate on colour mixing and showing you the colours, because all of your screens will be giving you a slightly different version. My phone, as I film it, gives me one version. YouTube is not as guilty as Instagram. Instagram at the moment is changing the colours and lighting on my photos to an extent where I'm starting to think I'm going to quit Instagram, because if you can't upload a photo as you've taken it, what the heck is the point of a photo app? It's making me a little bit cross at the moment. I'm going to persevere a little bit longer and see if I can work out some other ways around it. I've recently been trying to adjust it within Instagram and discovered this awful thing called looks in the edit function, where it automatically is doing a massive adjustment to your photos. So you have to go in and turn looks, or lux, I guess. It's me and my Latin background, as in Roman Latin as opposed to Latin American. You have to turn that off in order to get the colours anywhere like back to normal. It over adjusts, over edits, all of it. So what I'm trying to do is get back to an unedited version of my photo. Grand. So that was all of those ivy green mixes. Let's go into this, which I think is really an exciting green. So here again, just on the mat, and let's mix it in here. So on one side we come in with that. That gives me my majority of this colour. Colour A across the top. Then mixing back into these. Colour B. And again, subtle, but if you just look to either side of that, you're getting two distinctly different versions of that colour. And they're both good. They've both got sort of some tooth to them, some vibrancy, some lift. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be interesting with the yellow. That's quite a watery mix I've got on the mat, but I'm hoping it's going to give me something, yeah, really zesty. That's like the Paper Artsy Limelight, which is a wonderful colour. I might just get myself just a little bit of extra green in that mix. And that's coming down here. Nice. Let's take it into what has been fairly consistently one of my favourite mixers here. This is one of the beiges. I forget whether it's the ecru beige or the whatever else it called itself, flaxen beige. This might be the flaxen beige, actually, looking at it. That feels like flax, doesn't it? Yeah, that's nice. See, again, that's quite a watery mix. So I'm just going to dry off the brush, mix in the rest of what's on the mat. And that's delicious. So just looking back at some of the previous mixes with these greens. So that was with the pink, the mauves at the top. Then through the blues, getting us something softer, brighter. And now we're coming into these really zingy green-yellow mixes, which was one of the things I was after, because I found all the greens a bit a bit bluey. Obviously this one isn't that bluey, but it's coming to life as I mix. I mean, it's sort of one of the what's the word, central tenets of watercolour painting, particularly botanical watercolour painting, that especially green is always going to be more interesting. Greens you mix up from yellows and blues of all kinds are almost always going to be more interesting than pre-mixed or single pigment greens, just because you have more than one colour within the mix, and that's always going to give you something with a bit more dynamism, with a bit more depth, with a bit more oomph. Oomph is a good word, isn't it? I like a bit of oomph. Mix back in with those greens. Again, I'm going to pick up just a little bit of extra green because I feel like it didn't have a fair crack at the whip. Yeah, and these sort of mustardy beiges are also really right up my street. And as I say, it's no surprise to anyone that these are the colours that really make my heart sing. This one I think is maybe the ecru beige. And again, it's been producing some of my favourite mixes. Pick up the rest of the green, put that in there. So you can see the process continues, but really compared to the beginning, where I was creating these long strips of colour, this is going very speedily. There's another bit of my green. What am I up to now? The brown. Let's put some of that in that end. Oh no, hang on. I think I've just done that, haven't I? This is what I mean about focus. So we're actually on to the rusty red. Always worth checking back in. So there it is. As soon as you lose track of where you've got to, up at the top will tell you. I've had to change my water a lot with these paints. And I've also noticed there's a sort of filmy, slightly greasy film on the inside of the glass jars when I do that. So it's just things I'm observing about these Gansai Tambi paints compared to the ones I'm more used to, my Daniel Smiths, that there's clearly something in the ingredients, in the mixatives, that just has a bit more... Slime sounds like a really pejorative word. I don't mean to say slime in a very negative way. There's something a little bit more oily or filmy within this. Let's get some Mars yellow on the go with this green, because I think that's going to be quite fun. Maybe a bit more green into that mix. Yeah. Ooh, that's a really interesting colour. It's got kind of meadows and autumn meadows, definitely. That's kind of dried grasses in the field, catching the last of the autumn sunlight. And again, just take a look at those two different colours. Again, I'm not quite sure how much you can see in this light, but that and that, perceptibly different colours to play with. Almost there with this green. And then I think I'll leave you in peace again for a bit and come back when things are almost done. So we're going in now with this, what to me is really feeling like cochineal. I know we don't call it that anymore. Vermilion, I think they have. Cochineal, because it used to be made with the Beatles. Not the band. Oh dear. It's clearly been a long day. It's not been that long a day. Yesterday was a long day. Yesterday I was out planting bulbs until gone dusk. It was dark, fully dark by the time I finished getting the bulbs into the ground. But I couldn't leave off and leave them uncovered, so I had to finish what I was doing. No choice in the matter. That's quite a watery mix, so this one I'm going to have to watch my control on, because the squares over this side are even smaller than anywhere else. I didn't do my grid very well because I didn't properly measure, because life's too short as far as I'm concerned. You get what you get. There goes the green again. I'm sorry some of that paint palette is off camera, but you know what I'm doing. I'm picking up paint, putting it on the mat. This pink is an interesting one. It's a very powerful one in the mix, so things are strongly influenced by it. As far as pinks go, that's quite unusual. Pinks tend to be the weaker partner, but very often I've found this is giving me something quite pink. So there again, I'm having to add a bit more green to that mix to get what I'm after. And the last one, which will give us a kind of a, as I said, a pastel version of this green, because this pale pink is very much white pigment. Oh, it's really pretty though. Again, I'm thinking roses, end of season roses, which are still going outside the front door. So you can see that I'm getting real zinginess out of this from these very sort of soft bluey greens that are most of what we've got in the set. The zinginess is not short, and this is going to be a really vibrant corner when you come back and join me again. Back shortly. So here we are down in the last little corner. So I've just got the last 4 to do. I know this is the 4 going across here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the one to check in with if you kind of can't work out where you're going. Start with a cross. This is the first one with a gap. So I'm going to start with a cross, and this is where it joins up. So going across, 4th from the bottom. Another thing I've noticed is, in terms of staining, I'm having to use alcohol ink sometimes to clean the mat again, which is interesting. That's all I'm going to say. So there is clearly something in these paints. Having said that was all I was going to say. Yeah, there's something in these paints that clings on to this craft matte surface in a way that is quite surprising to me. So again, puddle of the vermilion, colour B, just coming in from one side, keeping the majority of colour B. Yeah, this one. Rather than colour A. And then for the second gap, picking up some more of that vermilion to go in there for the comparison. Almost there. So vermilion again, onto there. And here we're going to get that very pastel version from the palest of pale pinks. Keeping that in charge means really only very slightly dipping into the vermilion, but then I'll grab some more of it for this one along the bottom. One of the things that I enjoy about this process is just picking a sort of individual line to run your eye across and get a beautiful rainbow of colours, or something that's got quite unexpected moments. Looking at this from a distance, I know that you can sort of see, oh, there are dark patches and light patches. That's one of the first things that catches your eye, or at least it does mine, the lights and darks. And then it's kind of, oh, see, I've already finished that. I didn't need another of those. That's how fast this is going now. So we're on to, where's my first gap going across? 3 from the bottom, so I'm on to my last 3 colours. So here is what I think is Potter's Pink. That's quite a watery mix, so I'm going to put a bit more pigment in. And then pick up a bit of the pink next door. Keep that in charge at first. Down it goes into this corner. And yeah, this is the very minimal corner where the squares get so tiny. Then pick up the rest of that back into there. Then it's that same pink. No, hang on. Third across. See, it's got confusing because I'm down in the bottom. It's all been going splendidly up to now, I promise you. So third from the bottom, that's the last one that needs doing. I was just looking ahead. That's the other thing. I got distracted by what's the final bit of the task. There we are with you. And then mix into the rest of that. Pick up a bit more depth for the alternative. And that's what the last one is. The last one that hasn't been mixed is the final two paints mixed with one another. So colour A, put in colour B from one side, let it stay in charge, in there. And yes, they are all very similar down there because those pinks are quite similar to one another. But let's pick up a little bit more of the secondary one. And I'm adjusting because I can see I haven't got quite enough difference between the two. So I'm just bringing in a bit more of that vertical colour. Just so that we really see the options down in that pink colour. And I might also lift away and just put a bit more of the paler colour over that one. There we go. Nice bright pink. In fact, it looks like sort of pink grapefruit juice, the water now. And those are our 24 colours mixed every which way. I told you it was going to get zingy down in this corner. Those autumn fiery reds and golds, amazing. Little patch through the middle of those zingy yellows and greens, delicious. Then we're into sort of the more full-on greens through the centre there. Beautiful, beautiful blue greys. The mauves are quite pretty as well, I'll grant you. The mauves and purples get really interesting when you start mixing them with yellows, I always think. You get these interesting golds. Those beiges, when you mix with a pink, yellow and pink, you get these lovely sort of golden yellows. It's just endlessly fascinating to notice two colours interacting and creating something new. So I will dive in with a close-up, the little bit of music. I had said we were good doing doodling or leaves today. I think we'll save doodlings and leaves for another day, don't you? That colour grid feels like it deserves its own place in the sun after all that hard work. But yes, exploring your colours, even if you've picked up a set of paints and you think, oh well, maybe I shouldn't have, I'm not that excited by them. Get mixing, because in mixing the supplies you've got, you create whole infinite worlds of new possibilities for yourself. Thanks so much for your company today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing those colours come together in leaps and bounds. I know you've dotted in and out of the process, but I think that gives you a really good idea of A, how you can structure your colour grid, but B, the real variation of colour that is possible when you start mixing your paints. Give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed that, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please do consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to have your company. Leave any comments or questions down below. I'll leave details of these paints and the paper. I haven't used much else, have we? Oh, brushes. Paints, paper, brushes, and jam jars, but you can find your own jam jars. Thanks so much for your company, and happy crafting all.